Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Side Games Talks. My name is Hakeem Isler, your host, and my co-host Tyler Stevens, and we're here with Graham Nicholls, who's joining us all the way from Ireland. Graham is well-versed and well-knowledged, one of the pioneers of the research and study of out-of-body experiences. He has several books out. He's also got classes that he teaches and technology and protocols that he's been working on and designing for years. And so, of course, we thought it would be great to have him on. And one of the things that was a pleasant surprise was that Tyler and Graham, or at least Tyler knows Graham and had taken one of his class. Tell us about that, Tyler.
Right. Yeah, I took a class at the Ryan Research Center that Graham taught on out-of-body experiences. So they have a bunch of classes on remote viewing and, ESP research. But I was really interested in taking the class with Graham because it was such an experiential class. So I have you analyze your experiences, but also explore the history of out-of-body experiences as well, and the different protocols and methods. So I was very interested in the class. It was a great class, so enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So for you, this is a treat.
Right.
Be able to actually
now I get a one-on-one session, ask some more questions.
All right. I'm sure Graham will pass on his Cash App or whatever after this call for this private session. Graham, tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you get involved in out-of-body experiences, and then the idea of actually teaching them and moving forward with that? I know that's got to be a little bit difficult of a transition, or at least I would assume. Tell me more about yourself, or tell us all about yourself, and tell us how you got into this field.
Well, actually, teaching has actually been a part of my work pretty much since right at the beginning. I had my first out-of-body experiences in 1987. They were spontaneous initially, and then later on I found out about the concept of out-of-body experiences, and I learned to induce them myself just through a book. I just literally worked on a very basic technique, and I kept at it for 6 months and eventually had my first induced out-of-body experience. And then I was looking into the subject in London and what was around, and I found a teacher who was giving classes and lectures, and I started attending his lectures. And then I think he saw the potential in me as a teenager, and he took me under his wing and gave me my first weekend job, which was basically helping him set up the classes, sell books, that kind of thing. And so I was involved in the teaching of it and the education of it literally since the age of like 14 or 15. And then I started to teach some of my friends at school and people around me from around that time. So it's been a part of my life and a part of my process since I became an adult, since before I was an adult, basically. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I think I really like one part I really like about that story is that you said you found a mentor, a teacher.
Yeah.
And, I think that's a really big deal nowadays, is to be able to not just say, oh, I'm just going to figure this out on my own, but to really step back and go out there and search and find a good quality instructor to help guide you and mentor you, which is one of the whole concepts behind the side games, is bringing people who have these abilities into the same space with people who know about these abilities, research these abilities, and also have been teaching these abilities, so that there's a balance between what I'm doing on my own, but then also what I'm doing in regards to learning from others and sharing with others. So I find that really impactful about your story. What are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that, especially when my journey started off just hearing the word astral, like astral projection, and just sending me off to try and explore the topic. But I think just hearing that and seeing your exploration of becoming, I wonder, do you feel like it's been different since you started teaching you said you've been teaching, but did that maybe get your path off of discovering astral projection or like progressing through your exploration of astral projection? Did that change at all as you were going through as what you were teaching other people?
Oh, I mean, it's transformed completely, I think, as I've gone along. I think that's one of the amazing things, actually, I think, about discovering it so early, is I think if I'd come to it as an adult or later in life, I might have had preconceptions or an already established worldview and understanding about how I see things. And the good thing about discovering it at that point, I didn't have any preconceptions. I wasn't fixed in any one worldview or ideology or anything like that. So I just explored the experience directly. My mentor was very versed in the more esoteric side of things, especially theosophy, Alice Bailey, people like that. So he was really kind of coming at it from that perspective. And I remember him saying to me, if, as you're under 18, when you have out-of-body experiences, you only see in black and white, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of, no, I see in color, you know. But that sort of taught me that people's belief systems can maybe influence and alter the way they have the experience or how they see the experience. So I always had this open-mindedness that came, I think, from the direct experience and from interacting with different people right from the beginning. And I think ultimately that's what led me to explore the sort of parapsychology and get more into the science, because I was kind of like, how can I understand this in a more realistic way? What is really going on? How does it relate to consciousness? All these questions that I think I was passionate about, partly because I think the more you understand the experience, the better you can induce it, the more you can do with it, the further you can go with it. So I didn't want to be content with just going with the more esoteric sort of historical beliefs, that kind of thing.
I think one of the things that you just said is really powerful, because as I spend more time in this topic, when it comes down to just consciousness in general, when it comes down to psi and the abilities, you find people who've been doing something for a while and they have these very fixed views as to what things are supposed to be and how they're supposed to work, not taking into account that people may be having different experiences, and it's very quick to sometimes turn those people off. But in that same breath, there are people who just kind of take it way out there, and so they're just telling you all types of stuff, and you're like, I don't know how to validate this person. I want to be open to understanding that everybody has these different experiences. But then, how do I know that this person hasn't found a new way? Or like you said, your teacher is saying, oh, it only happens in black and white. And you're like, but I actually see it in color, and then there could be a debate there. Like, no, it's black and white. No, I see it in color. No, it's black and white. No, I see it in color. And then there could be something totally out of left field where, somebody says something like, well, it's not shapes at all. It's blobs. And when I see the color of a blob, I know that it's this thing. And that experimentation, we still need to be open-minded, because we're still discovering what the full scope of all these things are. And at the same token, if you're a teacher or a guide, you also need some sort of protocol to kind of follow, to be able to help guide a person to a level. So what for you as a teacher is that's how do you approach that space when you have your protocols and you're like, this is what I've researched and how I know a person can actually break into the space. And then there's things that I don't always know. And how do I stay open to maybe one of my students has an experience that actually drastically changes the way I look at things and the way I teach things?
Well, I guess there's a few aspects to that. I would say with my students, I don't tell them what to believe. That's the easiest starting point. I focus on methodologies that scientifically we can, and statistically we can see work. Because I've been doing this for, nigh on 40 years now, I've been looking at the things that actually work. And with my students and with, information that I've got from scientific studies and things like that, I look at the data and I say, okay, what are the methodologies that generally work? And then I also understand that people are different in their makeup as well. Some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, some people are more physical, some more mental. There are all different ways that people are. Some people are better at lucid dreaming or sleep states. Some people are better at trance states from a conscious state, like me. So I try to cater to the individual and make things as much based upon their needs rather than imposing any kind of worldview. I just give them the data that we know this statistically is a very effective methodology for your kind of person, for someone who's very visual, for example. We know that this method might be good for you. So that's kind of how I approach it. And then in terms of keeping an open mind, I try to go with the philosophy of Soshen, the kind of beginner's mind from Zen philosophy. So I try to look at everything with this sort of as if I'm experiencing it for the first time. I try every experience I have, I try to keep even a degree of open-mindedness and skepticism, even about my own experiences. I don't assume anything about them. If I try to keep kind of experiences that are more objective, like my verified experiences or the experiences I've had during scientific experiments. I try to put those in one category, and then maybe the ones that are a bit more of a question mark, like you say, like someone who's had like some crazy looking thing, I might say, okay, I don't know about that. Maybe that was more psychological, or maybe I'm misinterpreting what I'm experiencing. So I remain sort of neutral on that kind of experience, and I just put it in its own box, if you like. And I might revisit it if I get, for example, new information or new research, new science comes out. So I'm always fascinated by looking at the details of the experiences, because surprisingly, it hasn't really been done in much depth. The phenomenology, the kind of real details of how people see, how people move, what, all these elements of the experience. I really want to understand them and not just make assumptions based upon the esoteric ideas or what's popular on the internet or, that kind of thing. I want to move forward and really examine what people actually experience. So I guess the scientific method is my guide. It's not the outcome. I'm not focused on everything has to be accepted by science. I am open to more than that, of course, but I try to apply a scientific methodology. Truth is my guide, if you like.
How would you use, if you were to, have a study done right now today, how would you best, try to capture that out of body experience that it would be recognized in academia?
Well, that's a good question, because actually I've thought a lot about that particular topic, because I've looked back, for example, at the research they've done with near-death experiences, where they've put signs up. For example, Penny Sartori did some excellent research in Wales, where she put signs up, which she used brightly coloured lettering and brightly coloured signs, and in the hope that someone, when they have a near-death experience, might see the sign. There hasn't been much success with that kind of thing. So I thought, well, is there any real reason to believe that someone is going to notice a really brightly coloured sign in an out-of-body experience, or is that just an assumption? So I started to look at, what do people actually experience? What do they describe most commonly when they have a near-death experience? And the most common things you get people describing are small three-dimensional objects, for example. So you'll hear cases of for example, Pin van Lommel's case with the dentures, if you know about the NDE cases. And then there's the famous Pam Reynolds case where they used a drill, like a skull drill on her that looked a bit like, she described it as looking a bit like an electric toothbrush. So again, a small three-dimensional object. There's the famous tennis shoe that was on the ledge of the hospital that the woman saw. There are many other cases, but the majority of them, interestingly, have this sort of small three-dimensional objects. So as an example, my first step might be, if we were going to create an experiment, it would be to use small three-dimensional objects, because we know that's the most commonly described thing in an OBE, rather than just assuming that a brightly colored sign is going to be more effective, because people generally don't describe, I don't know, seeing paintings or flat, images. They tend to describe the small three-dimensional objects. So that's one example. There's also zooming effects, which people describe. It happens to me a lot in my OBEs, where your vision sort of zooms in on particular details. So again, I might focus it. That again might be the reason that people see these small objects rather than larger objects, because there's this sort of zooming in the vision. So the more we pay attention to how people actually see in the OBEs, I think the more it gives us clues to how we can set up an experiment and how we can make the experiment maybe more likely to be successful and things like that.
At the same time, though, I want to say that I feel like in nowadays with like the telepathy tapes, that just being able to capture the moment. So I've always thought about like this scenario where you would have somebody filming outside of two rooms. And in one room, you would have the person having the out-of-body experience or attempting to. And then in the next room, I would say, I used to say, numbers on a wall or something on a wall, but having a small item there, or like some random item there that they wouldn't know, or randomly deciding, and then putting it in the room and having them basically having the person record the whole time, having an out-of-body experience, going in and getting that information of what that item is, and then waking up and being like, it's a doorknob, it's something. And so it's like, how would you capture an actual out-of-body experience happening, or prove that it was something tangible?
That is the difficult part. That's what's made research into OBEs tricky, because again, there's often an assumption that every experience is of a peak level of quality, and that visual perception is the same in every experience, which it's not. It can be groggy in some. You can have an out-of-body experience and find yourself, miles from where you are physically. So, then that experiment becomes very tricky. So I think there needs to be, for example, an open time frame on things can be one way you could address that. So then the experience can happen, when the peak experience happens, you can utilize it. At the Institute of Noetic Sciences, I did some experiments there and also did a lecture there. And one of the researchers there suggested to me that maybe I could try and impact this interferometer, the quantum double slit experiment. Basically, they had one live connected to the internet 24/7. So the idea is that I would, when I have a peak experience, when I'm having an experience that I think I could maybe have an impact on that, I could travel there and try to affect the interferometer, try to have a physical impact on that device. So I did try to do that. Unfortunately, we don't know what the results of it were, but I did try to do that. And that's an example of something that you could do that's sort of open-ended. So I just had to send the date and time that I went there, and then they could look at the data. Unfortunately, they didn't look at the data, but yeah, that was an example of something in that kind of way that I think is open-ended and would be very interesting, because if there was a physical reaction, that shows that there might be some kind of actual presence or energy at the location as well, which I think would be really, really interesting for the research.
I think a good question would be just, because I heard Tyler say earlier, astral projection. And then we're talking about OBEs. And for our audience, could you describe if they're different, the same? Like, what's the difference between astral projection and OBE?
I think it's just a matter of terminology, really. Astral projection is the sort of esoteric term that, goes back hundreds of years and refers to the idea that there's an astral body, that you're an astral plane that you're traveling to. So, and the idea of sort of projecting your astral body into that environment. An outer body experience is just a more modern, somewhat scientific term to describe the experience. You might, for example, an astral projection is usually a form of outer body experience, but an outer body experience is not necessarily an astral projection, if you like. The reason for that is because an outer body experience can be spontaneous, whereas astral projection tends to mean an intentional outer body experience. You've induced it. So that's kind of the difference. They're just terminology. It's just a terminology thing.
I just usually say, when people have asked that question all the time on forums, and my go-to answer is, the goal is an out-of-body experience. Astral projection is a practice to get you to an out-of-body experience. Yeah. So astral projection is kind of the practice of it, and the out-of-body experience, like you said, Graham, and I would think majority of out-of-body experiences are spontaneous. That you just kind of find yourself outside your body. Yeah.
Yeah, about 10% of the population.
Yeah. Is there what do you think is the driving force or the driving energy or the driving tool that allows a person to go outer body? I have an idea, but I want to kind of hear your perspective before I jump in, and you're the master here, so I want to listen.
Well, I'm not going to claim I know. There are various theories on what could be the mechanism for how these experiences work. I do think that it's like other psi abilities. I think that it's probably most likely quantum in nature. I think that it's people like Brian Josephson who put forward he wrote kind of a theoretical basis for what might be happening. Biological utilization of quantum non-locality. So to break that down, it basically just means that you're utilizing the quantum reality to have a psychic experience, essentially. And I think that's probably what's going on. Then you've got ORCOR, or orchestrated objective reduction theory, that Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff developed, which looks at the low-level cells, not just in the brain, but primarily in the brain, like microtubules, and that they could be entangled in a quantum sense, and that could allow for, usually they talk about near-death experiences, but an out-of-body experience is essentially the basis of a near-death experience. So, so I think it's probably some kind of quantum entanglement with the brain, but there are other ideas as well, like hidden sector matter from string theory, that possibly there could be a replica of ourselves, a replica of our brains, replica of our bodies made of hidden sector matter, and that potentially that could exist independently of our physical form. That's dependent upon whether hidden sector matter is ever proven or string theory is ever proven. But these are different possibilities for how it could be explained within a scientific framework.
Wow, that went a lot deeper than what I was expecting. So thumbs up to you, sir. What about intention? Is intention something that helps drive this your ability or a person's ability to actually move through this? Is that something that you teach in your classes? It seems like intention and attention pops up a lot when it comes down to the use of psi abilities.
Yeah, for sure. Where you put your attention is where you go in an out-of-body experience generally. There are times in out-of-body experiences where you seem to be drawn in a particular direction, or it's like you're meant to go to a particular place or something like that. So actually, I often find those experiences the most powerful and most interesting. But yeah, in general, where you put your attention is where you're going to go. And the more you can get your intention into your unconscious mind, the more you can develop that relationship with your unconscious, I think the more likely it is to be able to get out of body in a consistent way.
Mm. Well, I think that taking from what you just said, sometimes you feel drawn. I would love to ask you about your most powerful experience that was validated, where you ended up, at the site of this big event, and then you were able to kind of bring back details about that event before it happened. Can you explain that to the audience, what it was? And then also, if you feel like there was any meaning, you said, like, based on what you just said, which was, did you feel drawn to that? Do you feel like there was a reason that you ended up there? And if so, what was it?
I think there's many potential reasons that it could have happened. I'll just explain it and then I'll sort of get into that. But so what happened was I was actually teaching a few friends at the time, and we'd hired a room where I could sort of teach the techniques, and I was teaching specifically the G technique, which is a sort of physical, mental, breathing exercise kind of combination of elements that I use consistently to help me get into an out, or at least to get to the pre-state for the out-of-body experience, because I tend to think the pre-state of the out-of-body experience is really the key to inducing it. So I was going through that whole process with the people that were there. And I guess initially I thought nothing really was happening. I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe this technique isn't what I thought it was, and maybe it's not quite right. But then suddenly this sort of energy just came over me and I felt completely overwhelmed, and I had to go down onto the ground to get some sort of balance. I might have fallen over if I didn't. So I went down onto the ground, laid down, and almost as soon as I did, I just went out of body, and was moving initially through a kind of, it looked almost a bit tropical, like a kind of tropical jungle type environment, like natural environment. There was a stream, there was lots of trees. It was very overgrown. I don't know why that element happened, but it did. And then there was a kind of break in the experience, and suddenly I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street in Soho in central London. Possibly the reason for being drawn there is because I was born in London. I had this strong connection with London. I worked around Soho for several years, so I had a kind of deep knowledge and connection with that place. But I was standing there, everything looked bluish grey. This is important because I call this the cerulean state, and many of my more powerful out-of-body experiences have had this quality to them. So I was standing there, and suddenly there was an explosion out from the right-hand side of the street, around about 150 meters from where I was standing. And then I remember a man running past me towards the explosion. I looked to my right and I saw the Polo Bar, which was an Italian restaurant that I knew well. There was general sort of chaos of people in shock and people trying to help other people, that kind of thing. It was kind of all chaos and smoke and stuff. And basically then I felt this kind of emotional energy sort of hit me in the chest. It was almost like it had come from the explosion or from the experience that the people had gone through. And it sort of hit me in the chest. And that took me out of the experience. And I went into a kind of void, not negative or anything, but it was just like I was in this rudimentary level of consciousness. There was no complex thought or anything like that. And two of the other people who were there had kind of come over to me because they'd noticed, obviously, that something very intense was happening, that I was not in a normal state of consciousness, that I was in some kind of altered state. And so they were somewhat concerned about me, and they'd come over. And Chris, one of the people who was there, was sort of slightly trying to coax me out of it. And then Lawrence, another man who was there, was also kind of trying to talk me round. And slowly I came back to normal consciousness. And then we made a circle, and I described that I'd seen this bombing, that I had this strong feeling that this was a precognitive event, that this was something that was going to happen. I didn't know exactly when, but I had this strong feeling that it was going to happen. Everyone there knew this location because we all knew London. So I was very, in a very strange state, very kind of on another level that night. It actually continued for days afterwards. I had small precognitive experiences afterwards as well. But yeah, so I described that to them, and then 5 days later, there was a bombing on Old Compton Street, exactly where I'd said. I described that it was in a bar as well, and it was in a bar. There was, everything I described, the right-hand side of the road, all of the details were correct. It was the most powerful in terms of the experiential aspect of it. And it was incredibly powerful because there were people there who saw me go through it, and I described it all to them as well. There's a full video about it on YouTube if people want to see it. And there's Lawrence, one of the people who was there, is in the video describing his memories of what happened as well.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so you asked why I think it might have happened. Well, I guess on some levels there was the aspect of maybe survival, maybe literally, like, I had planned to go to Soho around that time. So maybe it was a way of sending me a message not to go there. That's one possibility that I've considered. I did decide not to go there on the day that it happened, so possibly that's one reason. But also on a kind of deeper level, I think it led me to really think about why people do things like terrorist attacks and that kind of level of violence and things like that. So it led me to think a lot about ahimsa and kind of non-violence and things like this. I started reading Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Leo Tolstoy, all of these different people who were talking about non-violence and making sort of change in society without going into that kind of action. So it led me on a real journey of maybe looking more towards compassion and a different, more empathic way of living, maybe. So I think that was part of the impact of it as well.
Wow. And then for those who don't know, Graham mentioned ahimsa, and that's a part of the 8 limbs of yoga, which is one of the yamas, which is the first yama, as they say, which is this non-harming or non-violent. So that's really, really powerful, and maybe also a validator for what you've been doing. The work you've been doing to really keep you on that path. I think it could also be a purpose. When I tell a story of when I was 8 or 9, and my mom, would play the lottery, and I woke up one morning and I knew the numbers. And I told her, and I was like, these are the numbers. And she played it locally, and it came out nationally. And had she played it on the bigger scale, it would have come out. And it was like 6 numbers. So it's like, I don't know what the odds are that,
very low. Yeah.
Yeah. Like a kid goes to sleep one night and wakes up with 6 numbers that come out in the 6, the pick 6 lottery or whatever. It was amazing, but it was awesome to know it at the time, but it wasn't as impactful as it is now as an adult, and remembering that. And when I started on the path and the journey of understanding more about Psi, and saying to myself, oh, I had this experience that validated it for me and made it real, instead of somebody being able to kind of talk me out of this journey, talk me off that path, and say, hey, yeah, that stuff isn't real. Can you ever think of a time when that happened in your life? And now I'm like, yeah, when I was a kid, it happened. And that was a validator for me to actually continue forward. So that's super powerful. Super powerful.
I think too, one of the things that I definitely resonate with the precognitive stuff is I wonder if as you're exploring these things like out of body experiences and lucid dreaming, precognitive dreaming, if you sort of get these reverberations or like echoes from larger traumatic experiences. So like you could kind of get these, other type of shared experiences. Like you said, like you were kind of experiencing it as the people that were there. So I wonder, because you were so in tune of like exploring these, these non-physical altered states of consciousness, that you were able to kind of pick up on these experiences.
I think so. I think definitely the more emotional, the bigger the event in many ways, the more impactful it is. Often the more likely I think you are to pick up on it psychically, or at least it seems that way. I definitely my most powerful experiences have been things that do seem to have a very big emotional resonance about them, and that's definitely one example. And there was also a kind of, you mentioned a sort of echo. It was like I was tuned in to that situation for days afterwards, because I remember I was on a bus in London probably a few days later. I don't remember if it was after the actual real event had happened or before it, but a few days after anyway. I was on a bus and I just got this strong feeling of this person who I hadn't seen for probably 3 or 4 years, and suddenly he got on the bus like 2 stops later or something. He got on the bus, and so that was right after that experience happened. And I did also have a precognitive experience of the 7/7 bombings in London as well, which was a multiple attack, terrorist attack that happened in 2005. So there was multiple events, buses attacked, trains attacked. It was kind of multiple places, and I had an experience where I followed the train. I literally started off, I was floating in the middle of I was above the station, and then I went down through the station into the underground tunnel. And then the train sort of literally came through me, and I started following the train into the tunnel. And then we went into Liverpool Street Station. I think it started in Moore Street Station, went into Liverpool Street Station, and I stopped there, and then it pulled out of the station, and I just stayed there. And then the explosion came back through the tunnel. So it was similar in the sense there was this distance of maybe 150 meters or something like that. And then in the same way, I felt this emotional wave kind of hit me in the chest again, very much like it happened in the Soho experience. And it also had this cerulean quality, this blue-grey. So, and again, that didn't happen for a long time. I think it was probably 8 months or something like that before. Unfortunately, I didn't have witnesses for that one, but that one was also powerful because I spent the next few months trying to avoid being on that line of the underground. And my father actually worked at one of the stations that one of the attacks happened at. So not the one I saw, interestingly, though.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think this is important for people to explore? What do you think the value is for people? I know that's one of the questions that I get a lot when it comes down to any psi ability.
Because I think it's a way for us to directly experience and explore the nature of our own consciousness, the nature of what the mind can do. I'm very interested in human potential and what we, utilizing the faculties that we have available to us. And that's not just on a psychic level. I think physically, mentally, on many different levels. I think it's important to utilize that and to explore that. And I think all of us have questions like, is there a meaning to life? What is the purpose of consciousness? Is consciousness fundamental? Is there an afterlife? Is there a God? All of these kinds of questions. And to me, the out-of-body experience is the most direct way to address that, to explore that. I can't think of any other methodology that gives us that direct experience of something beyond ourselves, something spiritual, something divine, something that we don't understand on a daily basis. So I think in many ways it's one of the most profound experiences because of that, I think.
I love that. What do you think the biggest challenge is for when you teach this and you have classes and you have protocol? What's the biggest challenge that you constantly come up with when or bump up against when you're dealing with new people who are coming to the space who want to learn your protocol, who go to your classes? What's one of those main challenges you see pop up consistently?
I think it's probably the same challenge that most teachers or trainers or etc. come up against. It's keeping the person consistently practicing, keeping them on track. I think I think that is the age-old thing, because I think with any practice, people are very enthusiastic for maybe the first lesson, the first 2 lessons or so, and then it starts to kind of wane. Especially with OBEs, I think the tricky thing is you feel like you don't get any feedback at the start because you're laying there or you're doing sleep interruption or whatever methodology you're using, and you're trying to induce this experience, and it's not happening at first. So you have to keep doing this practice with nothing, no sign of an outcome or a result. And I think that's the hard thing. When I was learning, it was quite difficult to keep going when you don't have anything like a signpost. In actual fact, there are lots of signposts. That's the good thing about me teaching with people, because I can say, well, actually, you're getting some really good signposts, but maybe you don't realize that because, things like feelings of energy, rising vibrations, a sense of ghost limbs. There's many things that suggest that someone is developing or moving closer to that point, but they might not realize that that's a sign or that that's important. So yeah, but those are the kind of things that come up. I think other than that, it's maybe in terms of the more practical side of things, it's maybe people have fears and things like that, but I don't think there is anything to fear with this experience. So I definitely try to reassure people that, if anything, I think the experiences are life affirming and can even be potentially healing, I think. So yeah, I try to emphasize that.
Have you found any ways along your journey of aided use of technology with the out-of-body experience? We talked a little bit off the show about it, but I think you've mentioned a bunch of interesting concepts in terms of using technology for the out-of-body experience.
Yeah, well, I guess I was always interested in the potential of using technology right back to the beginning, and then probably in around 97, 98, I started building structures. So I built a structure that I call Epicene. It was a sort of steel structure there's an image of it on my website. If people want to see it, just type Graham Nicholls Epicene, EPICENE. So I made this structure with a kind of central bed that was connected with kind of theatre wire. So when you laid on it, it felt like you were floating, essentially. It was it was almost like a flotation tank, but without water. You felt like you were floating. And then I thought, so that's kind of giving you the sensation as if you're floating, giving you the suggestion in a kind of hypnotic sense that you're out of body or that you're in that kind of state. So then I thought, well, what could I do in terms of sound or something like that? So initially I started working with audio, with hypnotic inductions. Then I tried using audio with subliminals, and later added in infrasound. So that actually turned into the technology I use now that I call
Oh, did he freeze?
I think so.
Hello?
Oh, oh, there you go. You're back.
Yeah, you all disappeared for a second. um, yeah, so the technology is not binaural beats. It is basically uses infrasound and subliminals. And so I created an early version of that, and I had that mixed with the structure. So that basically helped to get people into the right sort of state for an out-of-body experience and made it more likely they would have an OBE. So that was the first time I explored that in around 1998. And then in 2004, I started working with virtual reality, and I created a large-scale virtual reality project at the Science Museum in London, which had a 10-meter screen. It was a one person at a time experience. So the person would go in there, and then there was this sort of interactive environment that was based on my psychic out-of-body experiences, the sort of altered state version of London, you might say. So they could move around and sort of interact. So, and then afterwards, people would feel, like they'd had some kind of cathartic experience. Often a lot of people describe, especially women, described it as very freeing because they felt like they could go anywhere, even places that maybe would be fearful in real life, that kind of thing. So then after that, I developed more and worked more with the infraliminal sound, which I still work with now. And then I also experiment a lot with sensory deprivation and different forms like that. This room I'm in now is my kind of blackout virtual reality, sensory deprivation room. So I use this for
your Gansfeld. Yeah.
Yeah, it is essentially like my Gansfeld. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Gunsfeld the experiment, can you explain what that does and what the sensory stuff really helps, how that helps?
Yeah, well, actually, Gansfeld is something I have worked with, and I sometimes advise people to give that a go. Because if I'm working with someone who, say, never had any kind of trance experience, they've never meditated, they've never had anything in that kind of realm, Gansfeld can be basically like a very light form of sensory deprivation. You could call it perceptual deprivation as well. But basically, what it is you take ping pong balls or a ping pong ball, you cut it in half, and you place the two halves over your eyes, and then you shine a red light. So the red light causes the pupils to dilate. They're looking for information, but no information is actually coming. So you start to have sort of mild hallucinations. You usually couple that with pink noise or white noise. I prefer pink noise because pink noise is more mild and it's not so abrasive on the ears, so it's easier to listen to for longer periods. Or I use my own infraliminal technology and I listen to that. But yeah, so Gansfeld has been used in a lot of different experiments, including telepathy experiments most often, and it's gained very, very good results because most experiments in general are done with undergraduate students. So if they're using an undergraduate student, that person's probably not going to have any real experience with psi or with psychic abilities in general. So the great thing with Gansfeld is you can take someone off the street who's never had any kind of experience like that, put them in the Gansfeld, give them that mild sensory deprivation experience, and then that ultimately can allow them to get better results in a psychic experiment. I think the more you can use sensory deprivation, really, often the deeper it goes and the more likely you are to have a powerful experience, psi experience.
So when you have the ping pong balls or a ping pong ball halves, I guess, on your eyes, are you closing your eyes or are you opening your eyes in that?
You keep them open you're looking into that red glow from the red light that's sort of shining in your eyes. Yeah.
Now, another thing that you said that I really want to touch on is that you said, you use undergraduate students because the chances are that maybe they haven't had any experience with psi. Do you think that you can amplify that if you start working with like youth, like kids or something like that? Have you had that experience?
Um, I haven't worked with kids in any real capacity, but because of my own experience as a kid, that I was doing a lot of work and I was having a lot of experiences right from that age. I'm very open to young people and teenagers. Like if someone wanted me to mentor them in that kind of sense, I would definitely feel like I'm giving back what I got from my mentor in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's something I really value. I think that definitely things like Gansfeld can really help to take someone who hasn't had an experience and teach them and help guide them into that direction. I do think you can essentially help anyone have some level of psi experience. Maybe some people are more naturally gifted in that direction than other people. But I think that if you take them through this particular process with the sensory deprivation, get them to focus on these different practices that we've honed over decades, then I think, they can learn to have experiences that maybe they didn't think were possible before.
Mm. Well, you guys heard it here first. Graham is looking for young individuals to mentor and teach how to be the next generation of Jedi. So, so yeah, Tyler, you got something?
Well, I got to get my kind of alien questions in, but I'm
not
always
very good
curious.
for that, I'm afraid.
But I'm always curious, not necessarily aliens as in extraterrestrials, because I'm not. That's probably my least of my interest. It's the interdimensional and beings that people encounter with non-human intelligence and altered states of consciousness. So I wonder, in your kind of experiences, or even with groups, have you guys encountered any beings that were maybe passed away relatives or loved ones, or even non-human intelligence itself?
Yes, I think both. Going back to what I said before, I guess I put those into my subjective box because I can't really know for sure what they are, or if they were really what they seem to be. Were they maybe some kind of archetype, collective unconscious, some part of myself, that kind of thing. So I don't discount that they're also not something far more than that. I'm open to either possibility, but I try to keep open to what potentially they are. But yes, I've had experiences of people who seem to have passed away. One that comes to mind right now is I had an experience where I was going along a major road next to where I lived, and this girl essentially came alongside me. Like, we were literally both floating in midair, and she came alongside me in the out of body experience, and we had a brief sort of interaction. And she seemed, she didn't say like that she was a spirit or anything like that, but I just got this sense of she was from another time, if you like. Her energy, her way of speaking, it seemed like she was not from now. And she seemed like she wasn't fully aware of where she was and what was going on. So it seemed like I was interacting with someone from a different level. So that was, I think that was one of the first experiences I had of a spirit, if you like, in that sense. Although I'd seen things from the age of around 5 years old, I had an apparition experience within the door of I grew up in a tower block, an apartment block, and in the doorway of that building, I saw this figure, this sort of humanoid figure, and I remember that was a really terrifying experience. But it was probably my first experience with something out of the ordinary that really made these things begin to be something that I considered almost normal within my life. They seemed to be something, a part of my world. And I often think of that experience as a real starting point. It's actually where I open my book, my first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit. I open it there because I feel like it was on the threshold, symbolically and literally, of my home. And that felt very significant. It was almost like it was opening my perceptions. And so from that point onwards, I was more open to these kinds of experiences. And then ultimately, the outer body experiences, sort of 6 years later. So yeah, so those are kind of early experiences. And then I've also had experiences of, I guess, what you would call guides, really, beings that appeared that seemed to be benevolent and to have good intentions in terms of guiding my direction in life and things like that. So I've had experiences like that as well. One actually even happened in a physical sense. So I was with a friend of mine at the time, Jian. We were meditating in my bedroom, and I was a teenager, and this ball of energy just drifted down from the top of the room around the size of a basketball, opaque green energy just kind of radiating, and it floated down in front of us, and it stayed there for, it's hard to say, but maybe around 10 minutes, and we both saw it. Very tangible experience. So that was another example of sort of like what I interpreted as an entity. Someone else, or a spirit, someone else might sort of interpret it in different ways, but that was an example of that. And then actually quite recently, just 2 or 3 years ago, I had an experience with another friend of mine, Max. We were away on a trip to Avebury, which is the largest stone circle in the world, and the whole complex is full of ancient sites, Neolithic sites. And we were at West Kennet Longborough, which is sort of up on a hill. And it was at night, it was kind of late one night, and we were kind of walking as if we were going to leave. And then as we were leaving, I had this intense feeling of something, and I just stopped. And then I could feel this sort of tangible energy, and I put my hand out, like I could feel it in the air. And then I literally, my hand kind of lifted up as if I was feeling the energy. And as it sort of pointed into the air, a kind of column of energy appeared in the air with kind of a beginning and an end, just sort of like a tube of energy, white energy. And we both saw it and just didn't know what to make of this. I'd never seen anything like it. It was huge. It was hard to estimate, but over 100 meters, and high in the sky as well. And we were just kind of looking at it. And again, you could interpret that in terms of entities, in terms of aliens. I don't know what to call it, but that was another experience that I had that I don't have an explanation for, but it was a very powerful feeling and very positive energy again.
Wow.
So there are a few examples.
Yeah, really good examples. So we're coming towards the end of our time, but I wanted to make sure that I ask you if a person's listening to this and they're looking for a really base level to start exploring this field, where would you suggest that they start?
Well, obviously my book or course or, that kind of thing. But
Tell us what those are really quickly while you're on it.
So my second book is my practical book that goes through all of the details of inducing an OBE. It's just been re-released as a special edition, so has extra chapters and more information. And that book is called Navigating the Outer Body Experience. Look for the black cover, special edition one. Then I have a course called the Navigator course, which is a sort of online course. Then I have the infraliminal technology, which I was talking about, which is the infrasound subliminal technology that helps to get to the vibrational state, which is the state that sort of launches the outer body experience. And then I do one-to-one teaching as well, and occasionally group courses like the one at the Rhine Research Centre. But mainly I prefer teaching one-to-one because I think it's the most effective way, because I can really customize everything to the individual. So those are the main things that I focus on in terms of teaching people. But in terms of where, like a tip that I would say, if someone really wants to learn this, I would say focus on that pre-state, focus on being able to get into that trance-like state, that deep altered state. I think explore those kinds of areas, deep meditation, sensory deprivation, like flotation tanks, things like that. Really look into that kind of area, because I think the more you can use your mind in those advanced ways and you can take yourself into those kind of states, the more effectively you'll be able to get into an out-of-body experience or utilize any kind of psi ability, really.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. Well, Tyler, do you have anything else for Graham?
No, Graham, maybe you could go into just a little bit. One of the things I enjoyed from your book, I can recommend both the class and the book personally.
Thank you.
But one of the things the first time that I heard it was that it was a different viewpoint of the out-of-body experience, where you're not essentially leaving your body and flying around, but it's more of like an expansion bubble of consciousness that you gain an awareness of. Are you still on that kind of line, or is that just one of the different perceptions that can happen during it?
Yeah, I think that's the idea of a traveling consciousness or perception bubble, as you described it. That's a good way of putting it. I think is actually the most common way people have out-of-body experiences. When you step back from the esoteric side of things and all the bodies, the astral bodies, etheric bodies, etc., and when you just look at what people describe, there's been studies like by Carlos Alvarado, for example, who looked at thousands of people and asked them what their out-of-body experiences entailed. In that kind of research, he found that the most common, 70%, didn't involve any kind of secondary body. It was more of either a traveling awareness or some kind of sphere. Some people describe 360 vision. I do get that on occasion. And then the other sort of smaller percentage will get some kind of energy body or something like that. So, but the majority get more this traveling awareness. And I suspect that is more the real nature of the experience. I think that's going by the data and what I've experienced and also the science. I think it's most likely that that's kind of what we're dealing with. I think the different bodies or the different forms we might take, I think are more maybe psychological constructs or aspects of our worldview and our belief systems that will impact, or just the fact that we're used to being a body. So we will generally have some kind of body. Like in my early experiences, I had an energy body more commonly. But then as time went on, it just sort of dissolved away, really. And I started to experience just more like a pure consciousness in the majority of my experiences. So yeah, I think I am still on that kind of wavelength in terms of what's happening, because I think that's the best science we have and the best experiential knowledge that we have at this point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely well said. Well, I think we've come to the end of this episode, even though I feel like, I want to talk for another hour and a half or hour. it's we want to keep these things within a reasonable time. I'm not even sure what time it is out in Ireland right now, but I just wanted to thank you, Graham, for everything. As you and I have talked, we have plans to expand the side games to Manchester in 2027. And would love to have you as part of that. So
that would be great.
Just keep that on your radar. I might end up in Ireland a lot sooner, hopefully, because it's been popping up on my radar as a place.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. This year, I've heard speak about Ireland. So I'm like, oh man, this place is calling me. So I would love to go out that way. And thank you, Tyler, for being here with us today. And
pleasure.
Yeah. Until next time, everyone, my name is Hakeem Isler, and we have Tyler Stevens and our special guest today, Graham Nicholls. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us for Side Games Talks, and look out for our next edition coming next week.